During a recent interview, Republican National Committee Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel and allegedly straight news journalist Martha McCallum both demonstrated a curious illness which seems to plague the GOP and America's conservatives. You see, when it's politically convenient, they seem unable to comprehend how linear time works, characterized by acute episodes of memory loss and delusion. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, folks, we have several clips to play, starting with the most recent one, this interview between Fox News's or Fox Propaganda's Martha McCallum and Ronna McDaniel. And as a reminder, Ronna McDaniel isn't a senator or a congressperson, but she is one of the most powerful and important Republican figures because as the head of the RNC, she's responsible for getting Republicans elected or reelected. So with that in mind, let's play the clip.
And this is a Biden White House that was meeting with social media companies, dictating what they put on their platforms before the 2020 election. That, to me, is suppression. This is a White House that killed a Hunter Biden story that we now know is true, that prevented voters from knowing that before the 2020 election. That, to me, is suppression. It's just ridiculous for them to say that. And let's look at what they're fighting at on voting laws. We are in 72 lawsuits right now, the RNC is, with Democrats going into states saying, we want to get rid of voter ID. Why wouldn't we want voter ID? Why shouldn't you say who you are to vote? Every American agrees with that. We have to get ID out to buy Sudafed, and they don't want you to show an ID to vote. Why are they doing that? That's not good for democracy. So they are absolutely the threat to democracy, and they're trying to dismantle our elections and our social media and control the narrative, and they're doing it in their own primary.
It's certainly worth looking at the actions of both parties and weighing what they have and haven't done to actually suppress anyone's vote.
Okay, so there was a lot of weirdness there. So Ronna McDaniel says the Biden White House, was dictating to social media what they could or couldn't put on their platforms before the 2020 election. The Biden White House suppressed the Hunter Biden story before the 2020 election. The Biden White House and the Democrats are trying to undo voter ID laws. Why do we need voter ID, or why do we not need voter ID when we need ID to purchase Sudafed? And then Martha McCallum there at the end, not pushing back on anything or correcting it, says, it's important to look at both parties and see who is trying to suppress the vote and who isn't. Okay, so the first big problem there is the Biden White House didn't exist before the 2020 election. Yeah, that's how linear time works. You see, in 2020, Donald Trump, a Republican, was president. He was in the White House. It was the Trump White House. So the conversations between the federal government and social media companies like Twitter and Facebook, as described in the so-called Twitter files, that was when Donald Trump was president, not Joe Biden. The Hunter Biden story that was unveiled in the New York Post, that did happen in 2020, in October 2020. And then social media companies made the decision to suppress the story because, given that it had links to revenge pornography of Hunter Biden and other things, and it was unverified information from potentially hacked materials, it violated their terms of service, and they took that out. But Donald Trump was also the president of the United States. Joe Biden was simply a political candidate, not in the White House. So unless Joe Biden's a time traveler, or we're in an alternate timeline because he has Doctor Strange's time stone, that's not what happened, okay? And it's so weird that Martha McCallum didn't correct her on that at all. But you see, this isn't new. This isn't new with Republicans. It's not new to the Fox Propaganda Network. I've got another clip from, probably a year ago, okay, in which Judge Jeanine Pirro on the Fox Propaganda Network tried to blame Biden for something else. Let's see if you catch it.
That Trudeau came out and he said, look, what I want to do is I want to keep Canadians safe, and they're harming the economy and they're endangering public safety. No, they're not. They're sitting there and they're just protesting. And the amazing part of it is Trudeau is now going to listen to Biden. Biden now has the final word on what you should do if someone is protesting peacefully. Biden, the same guy who in the summer of 2020 decided that he would allow people to burn down, streets and businesses and create all kinds of problems and arson.
The problem was Joe Biden wasn't the president in 2020. Donald Trump was president in 2020. He wasn't in a position to do anything. And by the way, for whatever it mattered, he strongly, outspokenly objected to the riots which occurred in the otherwise relatively peaceful George Floyd protests. But this is another clip, more recent, I think it was from back in June, in which they basically say the same thing. But this time they have our queen, Jessica Tarlov, on hand to provide them with a savory fact check.
Resolution on border security, Kirsten Sinema is going to be part of that. Those are things that Democrats can do without betraying our core values, and that would allow the Biden-Harris ticket to have a much better shot at winning. And it's going to be close. It's always going to be close. But I thought that was a really interesting
So pretend to be the middle ground, just like 2020.
No, it's not pretending.
It was.
Yeah, but why did
Just what happened to this country?
What do you mean what
Biden
happened?
pretended to be moderate, and look what happened. Look what we got.
Do you remember what this country looked like when that election happened?
Yeah, we had less crime.
No,
We had
no,
a
you
lot less
didn't.
crime.
Actually, all of the Black Lives Matter summer of looting, as you would call it, happened under President Trump. That summer was
He caused it. I get it.
And we were.
Again, the facts being inconvenient, just the utter revisionist history. So the bottom line is Martha McCallum and Ronna McDaniel just either they're really stupid or they were engaging in dishonesty to try to peddle a false narrative, trying to blame Joe Biden for things that happened when Donald Trump was president. And it's part and parcel of what the Fox propaganda and the Republican Party does. Now, one of the other things that occurred in that original clip, that first clip, was this idea that, well, we really need to evaluate which party wants to suppress the vote. Well, again, if we do that, we know who it is. And if you have any doubts, listen to Donald Trump when he was president. Listen to what he had to say.
Next one. It's just the common facts. I mean, they have a majority in the House, and therefore you need their vote, and they want to get certain things. I will tell you this. If you look at before and after, the things they had in there were crazy. They had things, levels of voting that if you ever agreed to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again.
They had things in there that had levels of voting that if we agreed to it, there would never be a Republican elected in this country again. Folks, we've talked about this. Only one party requires voter suppression and voting restrictions to win. The Washington Post had this great article back in 2021. It's called "The GOP's Increasingly Blunt Argument. It Needs Voting Restrictions to Win." We're not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to read some excerpts here just to drive the point home. A decade ago, Pennsylvania's Republican state senator and state party chairman both pointed to the state's new voter ID law as helping their party win the presidential election in their state. Representative Glenn Grothman did the same thing in Wisconsin in both 2016 and in 2012. And after that 2012 election, former Republican Party chairman Jim Greer claimed his party was indeed trying to limit early voting to suppress Democratic votes. It's done for one reason and one reason only, Greer told the Palm Beach Post before saying that Republicans essentially believed, "We've got to cut down on early voting because early voting is not good for us." There was more to it than that. In 2019, while debating a Democratic proposal to make Election Day a holiday and prevent purges of voter rolls, then Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell called the idea a power grab by Democrats. The next month, Georgia House Speaker David Ralston said that expanded mail balloting in his state will be extremely devastating to Republicans and conservatives. Lindsey Graham, if Republicans don't challenge and change the U.S. election system, there will never be another Republican president elected again, said Lindsey Graham. Matt Gaetz said, if we accept this universal mail-out balloting to people who didn't even request ballots, I don't think Republicans will ever win another national election. That argument worked its way up to the Supreme Court. In a key case, an attorney for the Arizona Republican Party, Michael Carvin, was asked why the party had an interest in things like preventing the election of ballots cast in the wrong precinct. His reason? Winning elections. Because it puts us at a competitive disadvantage relative to Democrats. Politics is a zero-sum game, and every extra vote they get through unlawful interpretation of Section 2 hurts us. It's the difference between winning an election 50-49 and losing an election 51-50. Okay? So, again, it's just simply a fact. It's the GOP that wants to suppress voter turnout, that they believe requires suppressing voter turnout. Now, with respect to the third thing, which is this idea that, well, why do you oppose voter ID? You need ID to buy Sudafed. Well, that's because Sudafed is a constituent component in making meth, and meth kills people. Voting early and voting without an ID doesn't kill anybody. So in addition to that, there is no statistically significant evidence to indicate that lack of voter ID contributes to any meaningful voter fraud in this country. Voter fraud is a statistical minority of a minority. It happens, but not enough to change the outcome of elections. Now, if you want to make voter ID free and easy, basically it's mailed to everybody. You don't have to fill anything out. It's automatic. It's free. If you lose it, it gets replaced for you automatically. There's a universal form of ID that's state to state. If you want to do that, then I'm open to that. But Republicans don't want to do that. They want to add little steps along the way, hoping that through attrition, enough people will not seek to get their voter ID and therefore just not turn out to vote at all. Now, the fourth thing was this idea that the Biden White House, again, was, dictating to social media companies what they could or couldn't put out. Now, as we've established, it was actually the Trump White House. They were in charge in 2020 and therefore were the protagonists of the Twitter files, whether the Twitter files writers believed it or not. And we found out during deposition, during, the House's investigation into the so-called weaponization of government, that Donald Trump and the Trump White House did indeed try to suppress information on social media, and for the silliest reasons. Let's play the clip.
Yeah. Okay. On September 8th, 2019, at 11:11 p.m., Donald Trump heckled two celebrities on Twitter, John Legend and his wife, Chrissy Teigen, and referred to them as the musician John Legend and his filthy-mouthed wife, unquote. Ms. Teigen responded to that email at 12:17 a.m. And according to notes from a conversation with you, Ms. Navarro's counsel, your counsel, the White House almost immediately thereafter contacted Twitter to demand the tweet be taken down. Is that accurate?
Thank you for the question. In my role, I was not responsible for receiving any sort of request from the government. However, what I was privy to was my supervisors letting us know that we had received something along those lines or something of a request. In that particular instance, I do remember hearing that we had received a request from the White House to make sure that we evaluated this tweet and that they wanted it to come down because it was a derogatory statement directed towards the president.
They wanted it to come down. They made that request.
To my recollection, yes.
I thought that was an inappropriate action by a government official.
I thought so too, but apparently not when a Republican does it. And then the Rolling Stone broke this again about a year ago. So both Republicans and Democrats in elected office have made requests of social media company to evaluate certain posts or messages. The voluminous requests often came from high-ranking political appointees working in different departments, offices, and agencies in the Trump administration. But during both the Trump and Biden presidencies, these types of moderation requests or demands were routinely sent to Twitter by the staff of influential GOP lawmakers, one with names like Kevin McCarthy or Lee Stefanik. Sometimes the requests would demand Twitter stop shadow banning certain conservative accounts or that the company reinstate banned or suspended right-wing personas. Other times, offices of senior Trump administration officials would send emails seeking to remove tweets that they believed to be hate speech or death threats aimed at their principals. And over the years, the knowledgeable sources say staffers for Republican officials would regularly flag to Twitter content they believed violated the app's terms of service or other policies, including on spreading misinformation or disinformation. So these requests have been made by Democrats and Republicans in and out of elected office. It's certainly not exclusive to President Biden or the Biden White House. And the stuff that happened in 2020 didn't involve the Biden White House at all because the Biden White House didn't exist. So again, this is a recurring pattern. The GOP and the right wing rely on this sort of revisionist history to rile up their base. They're counting on their base to be one of two things, either distracted, understandably, with family and friends and career, right? Things that probably matter more than the day-to-day minutia of politics, or outright MAGA cultists who are just easily manipulatable. This idea that you can just flat out lie about how time works. So it's one of the two things. Either Joe Biden is in possession of the time stone and is a time traveler, or Republicans and Fox News openly lie about linear time in order to facilitate their propaganda. Let me know what you think in the comments.